Our heroic Green Guardian finds herself in a place where there's no green to guard. Instead, the Shadowcurse lands are infested with undead at every turn. Thankfully, most of them haven't seen just how good our Huntress is with a bow, but not all undead will go down so easily. And if we're gonna bring this land back to its former glory, we'll need a lot more than just skills with a bow. Will Miss Fletcher and her animals be able to cleanse this land of the curse that plagues it, all while dealing with the ever-looming threat of the Absolute? Well, we got one way to find out. On to the video. As the fantastic Astrid Fletcher enters these Shadowcurse lands, the darkness encroaches. So to ward it off, we use a handy-dandy ring we picked up last act to cast the light cantrip. Then we set off properly, keeping our companions away since they won't be much good, and for once looking for life and civilization as a bastion in this horrid place. Not even a few minutes pass before we stumble across what can only be a Harper hunting party. As we're getting ready to ask them what they're hunting, the shadows themselves come alive and answer the question for us, even reanimating the poor victim they just took into a twisted form of unlife, and thus our first fight kicks off as we get ready to purge our new antithetical antagonists. Immediately, we Hunter's Mark and get one-shotting shadow after shadow thanks to the buffs we still have active from last act, giving us more radiant damage on all of our hits. Unfortunately, our fellow hunters seem ill-prepared as they get absolutely clobbered, doing little to our foes in return. When it's back to us, we fail to one-shot one enemy but leave it low and take out another in the hopes our Harpers will finish off the former. Sure enough, the undead fail to do anything meaningful and our plans work out perfectly. With Astrid getting another turn, she manages to take out two more of our opponents, leaving just the reanimated Harper left to be taken out by his once friends. Once they're all cleaned up, our new friends tell us they know a safe place and begin leading the way. Upon getting escorted in by Lysandra here, we immediately get magically restrained by a fellow nature protector by the name of Jaheira, who is convinced that we're working for the Absolute because of this little parasite. Thankfully, one of the tiefling kids from the Druid Grove vouches for us, and apparently Jaheira trusts this random child more than one of her loyal soldiers. Well, either way, just like that, we've got free access to roam the grounds of the Last Light Inn. As soon as we do, we head over to Quartermaster Tally and buy both the Cloak of Protection as well as the Yuan-Ti Scale Mail. The cloak, while simple, is all a little ranger could ask for. Granting a +1 boost to both AC and our saving throws means this makes us significantly tankier and will be sticking with us for the long haul. The Scale Mail, meanwhile, will replace our Adamantine Splint and has a base AC of 15, but also lets us add our full dex mod, making it effectively 20 AC, and as a little treat, we get a +1 bonus to initiative. But that's not all. Next, we head to Damon and give him some resources we've been accruing in return for the flawed Helldusk gloves. These replace our gloves of archery, meaning instead of a flat 2 damage added on to our attacks, we get a 1d4 fire damage, which is on average a little bit more, and if we crit, a bit more. And to cap things off, we swing by Mattis to purchase the evasive shoes, which basically just give us a +1 to AC, but with us using Hunter's Mark with our bonus action, they'll still likely be better than our Boots of Speed. Don't worry though, those will still come out for the occasional fight when we need to be a bit faster. After all that, it's time to have a conversation with Jaheira, who tells us all about the immortal General Ketheric Thorm, who's leading the cultists at Moonrise. Her plan is to have us infiltrate and see if we can find out the secret to his immortality, but first we need to find a way to get through the Shadowcurse. Thankfully, this handy Harper has already laid an ambush on a cultist convoy, so off we go. To make things easier, we summon our Raven companion and get in position for whatever the heck this unnatural abomination is to roll up. A moment later, our prey is in position and the fight kicks off. Starting off, the big old Drider whacks one of our buddies while using an upgraded Sanctuary on himself. So in return, we use our tried and true Hunter's Mark and start wailing on one of the cultist crony casters, unfortunately not killing but leaving him low enough for our Raven to finish off. Our temporary hunting partners do a little bit of damage here and there, while the enemy fodder mostly just throws Alchemist Fire and leaves the big damage to their big boss, who shreds through anyone he targets. Now that Astrid gets another turn, we go all in on said big boss, even using our bow's unique pushing attack to send him flying off the edge and reduce him below half health lickety-split. Both our loyal companion and momentary mates continue just peppering enemies on their turns, with the enemies getting a few licks on our side in turn. Karnas over here unfortunately also decides now is a good time to re-sanctuary. When it's back to us, we use a Featherfall scroll in case we need to jump off our little roof, finish off one of the goblins that we can shoot, and top up our our HP since the scary Drider can only multi-attack people who are missing health. The Raven continues its slaughter as well, leaving just one remaining crony alongside the many-legged leader. But before we can get too happy, the playing field gets evened out with the Soul Goon taking out 2 of our folks and Karnus managing to get 1 more as well. As things get down to the wire, we fire off 1 more shot, remember that our Raven's beak attack can blind enemies, and then fire off a second shot that barely fails to kill but does put him to sleep thanks to drow poison that we used earlier. Yet once again, the goon is a thorn in our side and wakes up the big fella, who's so laser focused on killing the last Harper that he dies to an opportunity attack from our well-positioned Corvid companion, who isn't satisfied with just killing the boss and even finishes off our final foe as well. Our reward for clearing out the convoy is the lantern they were using to keep the curse at bay. Only problem is it's fueled by a living pixie. Since that's far too cruel for us to use, we decide to take the risk and set her free. Thankfully, Dolly Thrice here is kind enough to give us a blessing of hers to let us bushwhack our own path through the curse. With that acquired, it's as easy as following the main road to at last get to Moonrise Towers. And once we arrive, we find some familiar faces from Act 1 pleading their case to General Thorm, who decides to ask for our input. Unfortunately, when we tell them about the atrocities these goblins committed, they seem to misinterpret where we're coming from. Either way, General Thorm issues the death penalty, which they don't take too kindly towards, but I guess they weren't CC'd on the immortality announcement. Now that they're out of the way, Kethra goes off to the roof and we have a chat with Rajo Blodra in order to buy the Circlet of Hunting. This cute circlet lets us gain a 1d4 bonus to attack rolls as long as our target is marked with Hunter's Mark, amongst other effects, basically just making us hit a bit more reliably. Then we go have a chat with Kethric's right-hand lady, the ever-zealous Zarel. Thankfully, this prey is very easy to trick and she immediately assumes we're the right person to go to the Thorm Mausoleum and track down a certain Balthazar who went looking for a very important relic. Since we have a destination in mind, we set out into the wilderness once more. Of course, these lands are still crawling with unpleasant undead, which means we've got to clear out the town square, the outskirts of the local hospital, and even the adjacent morgue. All this effort does mean we take a long rest and get rid of all the handy buffs we had from last act in the process. When we wake up, we head to the toll house and find Gering Oath Thorm, who is right by a window and practically begging to get pushing attacked with our Titan string bow. Thanks to a vigilance elixir, we managed to go first, but our extra attack disappeared into the void, so we mostly just spend it running and casting Hunter's Mark. The baddies, for their part, spend their turns going after our poor old Raven, and when it's back to us, we weaken a couple of them so that our pal can get his revenge. At this point, we're far enough away that they all need a dash to reach us, setting us up nicely to shove one to its death. Don't ask me how that works with a floating skull. And we shoot another one a couple times to murk it too. However, they don't go gently into that good night, as they're hell-bent on killing our winged friend, but at this point, with the big boss still stuck somewhere below and only a few left, it's like shooting poachers in a bear trap. Once they're gone, all it takes is a single arrow to eliminate old Jerry too. Our continued culling finds us at the local pub next, where this time we encounter Thizabald Thorm. He wants us to tell him a story, but Astrid unfortunately ain't no storyteller, and so another Thorm decides it's time to be put down. The general strategy for us here is to take out the goons first, so we get peppering away and put down a web with our spider to keep the big man at bay, which works out wonderfully. Next round we realize that our new gauntlets burn away the web, but we've also got our boots of speed equipped so we can keep Thizabald at a distance with good old-fashioned kiting. We continue working away on the zombies, but before we get the last of them, Thizabald does manage to slaughter our spider. Still, the last one burns to death right after. Now that it's a 1v1, we just shoot the big fella, who is immune to all physical damage, so we don't shoot him for a lot, and then we run away with our boots of speed to force him to dash. It's a good thing that Astrid knows patience is one of the best virtues a hunters can have, because by golly, we rinse and repeat at least a billion times. Half an hour later, and we finally take out the second Thorm. The next Thorm in our side resides in the nearby hospital, but in order to see him, we need to put on a performance to get past the front desk. Thankfully, Astrid nails this one. Once we get in though, we see Malice Thorm is just as twisted and deranged as everything else in this place, as he's currently operating on a man who very much so does not need it, and so another fight kicks off. We start off with a hunter's mark as per usual, and then fire off a many targets arrow, hurting a bunch of the goons. Then we crit miss with an ice arrow, killing the patient totally by accident, but also fueling our bloodlust elixir, letting us crit miss with an acid arrow as well. Must be a faulty bowstring or something. Thankfully, Malice is more interested in using his legendary action on his own people, and only one enemy comes up to us via unconventional means. Our Raven companion and Crab familiar both get to work on the closest nurse in the meantime. When it's back to Astrid, she coats her weapon with crawler mucus, meaning our next shot actually paralyzes our opponent, giving us a free crit hit on top of it. The baddies once again all just dash about the room, and we continue to backpedal. Thankfully, first blood at last goes to the renowned Raven. We do get another crit miss on the literal unmoving target, but manage to get her with a second shot and weaken up the nurse right in front of us. Then we use the boots of speed to dash down to one of the bodies and pick them up, since Malice has the ability to resurrect them if they're just laying about. Speaking of the good doctor, he continues to abuse his medical staff while they do some groundbreaking research when it comes to eliminating crabs. Unfortunately for them, our ferocious Fletcher is here to rain on the parade, followed by using both our bonus action and remaining action to dash about collecting the bodies and get into a good sniping spot. The last remaining nurse is brought low a moment later, and now with just the Dr. Dearest, he is easy prey thanks to our ability to kite and his inability to go up these collapsed bookshelves. It gets even easier when our poison paralyzes him, and before you know it, he too goes down for the count. Oddly enough, on his body, we loot a loot. I suppose the doctor wasn't just into medical instruments. From there, we keep doing our best to clean up the town, bumping into Arabella, who we say can stay at our camp, and then Raphael, who definitely does not stay at our camp, but does warn us about a devil lurking in the nearby mausoleum. Then we discover some fish folk down by the shore and get depolluting the water in no time flat, followed by playing a little jig on our new loot for a comatose guard, waking him up in the process and learning about Thaniel, a young boy who happens to be both the spirit of the land and trapped in the Shadowfell. For all our hard work, we finally get level 7, giving us a new second level spell slot alongside Silence to go with it, just in case we're struggling against some casters. More importantly, we gain exceptional training, letting all of our beastly buddies dash, disengage, or help as a bonus action, vastly increasing their mobility. Good timing too, as we talk to Halsin about Thaniel and he tells us things are about to get dangerous, so we summon our crab familiar, spider companion, and using scrolls, a water elemental, and even a couple of ice methods. We also drop a spike growth down and get the 411. Basically, a portal's about to get conjured and we need to keep it alive for 5 turns. For whatever reason, when the enemies spawn, they don't aggro, so we do a bit more prep with a web, as well as a darkness arrow on the portal to obscure vision, and a little ice method breath blast. Then at last, they finally get annoyed when our elemental teleports right into their midst. With all of our prep work, things go pretty swimmingly. We're able to take out enemies at a decent rate, especially with the help of a bloodlust elixir and speed potions. Enemies, for the most part, prioritize shooting our summons instead of advancing, and when they do clump up, we have spell scrolls out the wazoo to obliterate them while creating ice, which of course just stalls them even more. It is no surprise then that our arboreal advocator is able to defend the portal easy peasy, and out comes Halsin with an unconscious Thaniel. Apparently, Thaniel has a missing corrupted half somewhere nearby, and we just need to convince them to recombine. Problem is, when we do track down Oliver, as he calls himself, he's not exactly willing to return. He's got a barrier around him that makes him immortal, and he's quite the summoner too, throwing out hordes of enemies round after round. But so long as we take out his summons, his barrier gets weakened, and now that we know where his playmates spawn, we set a trap for them, causing them to instantly die the moment they show up. After that, it's just a matter of time till the corrupted spirit is all worn down, and like any kid after a good play session, he just wants to go home, and so the spirit of the land is restored. Except for the one thing, still keeping it down. To be truly restored, Ketheric Thorm must die. So we're off to the mausoleum, wherein we immediately find a hidden doorway leading deeper underground with a few button presses. Some somehow leading us into an ancient Sharan gauntlet that feels about as far from wilderness as we could get. Before we're allowed deeper in, we need to first solve another button-related puzzle, this time avoiding invisible walls by approaching first from the east and then the south. Heading to the next room, we see all the signs of a cloaker's lair, an aberration that only looks like an animal, but I promise you, these guys are horrible for the environment. And also somehow significantly smarter than our hero. Thankfully, smarts can't stop a dozen or so arrows straight to the dome. Next room over, we find a group of friendly skeletons. Well, they're friendly for now, working for Balthazar, who thinks that we're here to help. But sooner than he can let us into his hideout, the world starts shaking, portals start spawning, and undead Sharans start pouring out. Astrid gets to work on popping portals, which typically she manages in just one shot. Meanwhile, our bear gets to disarming the folks that do manage to spawn. The thing is, more portals spawn faster than we can take them out, and each portal that lives of course brings in more Sharans. Not to mention, sometimes we just fail to get the one shot, which results in the final initiative order ending up like this. Even though they take out our bear soon after, we're really not concerned since we have insanely high AC as well as protection from evil and good active, giving them all disadvantage. Things do get a little bit dicier after we lose concentration, but it's still just a matter of time as we pick them all off one by one. All it means is we've got to be a little bit more mindful about kiting. Afterwards, we at last have our chat with Balthazar, who wants us to retrieve the relic in the depths of this place but won't tell us what it is. And while we're tempted to kill him here, we decide to hold off in case we can get more use out of him first. Continuing on, we find our next lead in the form of a gauntlet of trials that only require a little bit of blood sacrifice to activate. The first of these is the soft step trial. All we need to do is jump over a trap, jump through a window, and then lockpick a door, all while avoiding the roaming guards. This gives us our first umbral gem, which acts as a sort of key to the door at the bottom of this place. We only need 3 more. Next up is the self-same trial, and based off of the name alone, our keen animal instincts tell us it's time to strip off all of our gear. A good thing too, since this trial has us fight a clone of ourselves made when we start the trial. Since we put all of our gear back on after the fact, this fight is made even easier, although I'm sure we would have won anyways. Either way, that's umbral gem number 2. The last trial is Faith Leap, in which we are meant to navigate an invisible pathway, but with these handy dandy platforms, we just jump past most of it, so long as we make sure to go back onto the path before landing on the final platform where we get umbral gem 3. Now, even though we finished all 3 trials, we're still missing an umbral gem, so we get looking around and find this library full of foes. They're easy enough to clean up, and once that's done, we find a secret room in the back that holds Dark Justiciar Halfplate, which we won't be using now, but keep it in mind as it joins our bag of tricks. While our search continues, we stumble across a lonesome displacer beast. Chasing it down to make sure it's okay, we for once get ambushed by a fellow hunter, the devil Raphael warned us about, Yrgir. Turns out, he's not really a fan of Raphael either, and leveraging this to our advantage, we convince him to let us help him find a way out of the contract trapping him here. However, since we're free to talk to the displacer beast now, we find it has a worrying relationship with the devil. Sure enough, Yrgir has been drugging his beloved beastie with succubus spittle, which has the exact effects you'd think it would. Upon relaying the news to this poor feline, she agrees to help us murk him. And by golly, does this damnable devil need destroying, starting with our bear disarming him, letting us with a vigilance elixir go first and steal his weapon. Then Astrid unleashes every bit of her wrath that she can, even downing a speed potion to help out, though that attack is just a miss. Without his main weapon, the big fella can't do much, so he just throws out some bombs and marks our raven familiar. Since everyone else is surprised, they all just pass their turns, letting us once again send a barrage at Yrgir, getting him nice and close to death, followed by us moving away from both explosives and enemies, leaving them to take out their rage on our summons, who are more than happy to help fight for a fellow animal. Unfortunately, one of the Maragons decides to blow us up for real this time, leading to us taking some nasty hits. Either way, when it's back to us, all we need is a couple more shots on yucky Yrgir and the displacer beast has her revenge. With our bonus action, we heal up, and our final action refreshes our speed pot. With the big fella down for the count, the fight is easy for Astrid, but the displacer beast isn't so lucky, as every enemy is hell-bent on taking her out too, and there's little we can do but watch as she goes down swinging. We certainly can avenge her, however, and hopefully she's put at peace wherever deadly horse-sized tentacle cats go in the afterlife. Once the dust has settled, we even managed to grab the final umbral gem that we needed by Yrgir's throne, meaning we're free to find out what's at the bottom of this place. But before we do, we head back to Moonrise's prisons and start yeeting the patrolling scrying eyes into the abyss. And also, whatever the heck this is happens, I gotta admit, I appreciate the moxie of this guard who tried to arrest us mid-death. Either way, once all of the guards, as well as the warden, have been sent to the void, we're free to bust open the prison and free both the tiefling refugees as well as the Iron Hand gnomes and Barkis's buddy. Naturally, once we get back to the last light, Barkis is overjoyed. Unfortunately, Wulbren Bongle is a complete waste of existence that reminds us once again why we prefer the company of animals. Speaking of, it's time to get back to our lonesome adventure and use all the umbral gems we acquired to find out what's at the depths of the Sharan Gauntlet. On the other side of the grand door is a portal that leads us to quite the sight, a Shadowfell prison built to contain some unknown figure at the bottom that must be the source of Kethric's immortality. Unfortunately, we kinda just forgot about Balthazar, who shows up at this point to do something nefarious, no doubt. And to make matters worse, when we try and attack him here, he just goes nuh-uh and floats away while Astrid just sort of stares on. At least when we get to the bottom, we're able to get the jump on him, using our bear to disarm him and a speed potion to keep up the onslaught of attacks. Balthazar on his turn uses the world's greatest animate dead, summoning a veritable horde, and yeets our cat familiar into the void who is kinda just hanging out, and also that gives us inspiration? I don't know, man. Either way, the baddies start laying into our bear companion something fierce, even putting it to sleep. Back to us, and we use a bloodlust elixir, then an elemental arrow on Balthi and the bear, triggering said elixir with said bear, who is more than happy to fuel our onslaught as we fire arrow after arrow into a very tanky Balthazar thanks to his Spectral Aspect legendary action. Immediately after, our protection from evil and good is broken, and we're also blinded, yet we're tanky enough to avoid most hits anyways. And as it turns out, being blinded doesn't matter much if you have a lightning bolt scroll and a strangely silent invisible bomb. Like I said, the little goons aren't really a bother to us, so from here it's easy to clean them all up bit by bit until eventually the corpses are once again just corpses. At last we chat with the figure here known as the Night Song, who greets us by saying this, but when it becomes clear freeing her will end Kethric's immortality, we lay a hand on her. Thus, the demigod daughter of Selûne, Dame Aelin, is remade and ready to join us in kicking some bony booty. For our efforts, we at last hit level 8, giving us land stride, making us immune to difficult terrain, and even though it doesn't say it, also damage from spike growth. Our companions also get a wee bit tankier, and last but not least, we get another feat in the form of Sharpshooter. This makes it so we don't suffer attack penalties from being on low ground, and also lets us choose to take a -5 to an attack roll for a +10 to damage if we hit. At this point, we're not accurate enough to use this on every enemy, but it's still worth it a lot of the time. Before our final confrontation, we head to a hidden Sharan sanctuary in the center of town that lets us make 3 saving throws, 1 for each mental stat, and upon succeeding, we get a +5 to all corresponding abilities that last until long rest. To add on to that, we can pray at a Sharan statue back in the gauntlet to get necrotic resistance until the next rest as well. Once that's done, we gather our Harper allies and start the raid of Moonrise with a spike growth, which somehow draws everyone but us into initiative, and when we do join initiative, it puts us way at the end. Our allies also decide running through our spike growth sounds like a great strategy, proving they really are dumber than our animals. Either way, both Astrid and her loyal Raven start firing at Zarel, while the crooked cultists focus on finishing off our Darwin Award-winning allies. When it's back to us, we manage to get a lucky crit hit on the boss lady, but unfortunately fail to take her out. After taking out all of the frontline fighters, the enemies start pushing towards us, which is especially spooky since sharpshooter or not, we just can't seem to hit them. For what it's worth, Jaheira almost manages to do something to help us out, before getting counterspelled and promptly smited into oblivion and beyond. At least Zarel is equally useful, as her will to fight seems to be completely gone, resulting in her just skipping her turn. Even without her though, her troops do just fine at tearing into our backline. Thankfully, we've got arrows of many targets to even the playing field. The rest of our foes are less than willing to bother crossing the spike growth, which is fine by us since it means we're in a ranged standoff. As you should know by now, Astrid in a ranged standoff is exactly where Zarel doesn't want to wanna be. And apparently, neither does the final surviving Harper, who just dashes into the spike growth. What are they teaching these people? They do actually manage to kill somebody, surprisingly, but less surprisingly, they don't last long afterwards. Since we've been picking folks off this whole time, at this point there's not very many folks left to pick off, and as they're determined to keep it a ranged battle, it's all the easier for our archer extraordinaire. Upon cleaning up the main room, we head upstairs and find a smaller fight awaiting us. This time it's just a necromancer and her necromites, so it's as simple as a few arrows let loose. Then at last we're on the roof where our prey, now weakened and cornered, awaits. But everyone knows a cornered rat fights harder than ever, so it's a good thing we've got Dame Aylin here to help. As soon as the fight kicks off, with the help of a flying potion, we get on top of this column, use Hunter's Mark on the necromancer, and fire off just a couple of super powerful arrows to take her out. This does result in Kethric's aura creating a necromite cocoon that ticks down out of combat and spawns another enemy in combat, but hey, you can't win them all. Meanwhile, the big man and Aylin start duking it out, or well, Kethric starts hitting her while she just misses every attack before getting brought down to literally 1 HP by the goons. For our part, we get focusing on Thorm himself, while getting some collateral on the bony bozos thanks to many target arrows. He in turn knocks out Aylin, who I may have oversold as an ally. In my defense, you'd think a demigod would have a bit more oomph. Regardless, this fight is actually pretty easy for us. With the high ground, we can shoot General Thorm with impunity, and since he's exclusively melee, that just means hitting us is left to his necromites, who rarely manage the feat. Meaning we just need a couple more rounds and a few more attacks to send the old man reeling into a cutscene. Unfortunately, said cutscene gives him the ability to summon a giant tentacle, and our resident demigod is just as useless as she is outside of the cutscene. So we can't help but watch as both our ally and enemy teleport somewhere far underground. Naturally, the moment we clean up the remaining necromites, we jump right after them, landing in a mind flayer colony, wherein we find a whole host of intellect devourers that need killing, and one very familiar one that needs freeing in the form of us, from way back at the start of our journey. In return for rescuing them, we gain the ability to summon them to aid us once per short rest. Continuing on, we also find and free Zevlor in here, alongside a host of mind flayers, but this is one of the rare instances where our allies are actually really helpful and quickly killithid these illithids. For better or worse, however, our pal is hell-bent on escorting folks out of here instead of helping us with the big fight on the horizon. Elsewhere in here, we also find this big old puzzle that upon being solved opens up a door leading to a handy-dandy brain in a jar, who we're actually able to talk to once we plug it into a nearby machine. Once we get chatting, they tell us they want us to wipe their brain, and in return, they'll teach us a technique. We give it a whirl and find ourselves with the Githzerai Mind Barrier permanent buff, granting us advantage on all intelligence saving throws going forward. Now it's time to prep for the big showdown, starting by swapping out our bow for the Nair Misser and Hellfire hand crossbow, since force damage will be more effective. The Yuan T scale mail for Dark to Sincere half plate for advantage on con saves, and our boots for the boots of striding so we can't be moved against our will, all capped off with a heroism elixir. We also make sure to, as usual, buff up our summons, Scratch, the bear, and us. Then we descend into the depths and find our prey chatting with Gortash and Orin, the other two chosen of the Absolute. But they're not all they appear to be, as it turns out the Absolute is an Elder Brain, and to make matters worse, one that's under their control, not the other way around. Either way, the brain and our two future prey teleport away somewhere else, leaving our current target mostly by his lonesome. Since they're gone, we use flying plus invis potions to get our bear next to Kethric, Scratch next to a recaptured Aylin, with us and Astrid next to a mind flayer where we fire a shot to get a surprise round. As everyone is occupied, Scratch frees Aylin, our bear disarms Papa Thorm, and everyone else starts laying into the mind flayer for a bit before Astrid swings by the main platform to yoink our foe's hammer. Thanks to the surprise round, we're able to keep going and finish off the mind flayer before the big bad can even do anything, and without his hammer, he just kinda punches real hard. Either way, he's not a threat, so the whole gang gets to lay into him, shredding through his HP super quick. Unfortunately, even with no weapons, he does manage to take out a couple of our summons. Before too long, the old man is down for the count. That's about as easy as a hunt could get. Well, easy right up until he sacrifices himself into this big old bone pit and is reborn as the aspect of a god of death, but I think he'll find Astrid is not so easily scythed down. Round 2 kicks off with us using a darkness arrow to blind him and his legendary retaliation frightening us in return. So we use a speed potion fueled protection from evil and good to regain our movement and fly to safety. From here, our plan is straightforward. We get into a loop of flying down and shooting the big fella, topping up our HP when we need to, and using darkness arrows to either hide from his attacks or blind him. All the while, he just keeps hitting the whole battlefield, including his own ever-spawning minions with his Call of the Damned. After a certain point, he also starts eating them to heal himself up and give him access to Finger of Death, but so long as we have a darkness arrow working, he can't actually target us with it. While we can't reliably outdamage his healing, he can only do it so many times, as each time he eats a necromite, the max amount of them allowed on the battlefield is reduced by 1. After eating 8, the lonesome deity is stuck by himself. Isolated, worn down, and incapable of moving, our prey has been pushed to their limit and been found wanting. All our huntress has to do is finish the job. As the god of death falls like all the rest, we get Kethric's netherstone that was controlling the brain, find out that Wulbren Bongle is planning acts of terrorism in Baldur's Gate, and at last leave the Shadow Curse lands. But they aren't the Shadow Curse lands. Not anymore. With all of our hard work, the land has been restored, and our Green Guardian just can't wait to see all the beasties that will call this place home. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed part 2 in Astrid's adventures. Unfortunately, part 3 will be about a month or so away as I'm heading on vacation, so I will see you all then. And as always, a special thanks to our Storyteller tier members, Bunny Warren, Okan, Damon, Mark Rainbow, Vivian, Rat King, Lovely Velvet, Apricot Antlers, Lumina, Beltfed Joe, Chance Hine, El Guardia, Cluck Vader, Cody Lumi, and Ramon Standalone.